Hello, everyone, and welcome to the both taped and live version of Mastering Dungeons. This is going to be a very special news-filled episode. I am here with my co-host, Teos Abadia,
Hello.
as well as Sly Flourish himself, Mr. Mike Shea.
Hello.
So we wanted to have a full news show this week because there was a pretty big announcement that came out literally 30 seconds after we stopped recording the last show last week. And that, of course, is that Wizards of the Coast purchased D&D Beyond, which is both, of course they did, and possibly huge news with ramifications that will go on for centuries, if not decades. So let's talk about this purchase. First of all, just the bare bones of it. It was announced on Wednesday. Wizards of the Coast purchased D&D Beyond from fandom for $146.3 million. Initial thoughts from my co-hosts.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry that they outdid my bid. I had set aside a small amount of change that I was going to use, just cash on hand, what we call.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
I think what you said is true, is that it was both surprising and not surprising. There were two reactions that I think immediately registered with me as the most true of the whole situation. One was people saying, wait, they're not already the same company? Mm-hmm. And the second was people going like, of course they did. It was the obvious thing. I'm really surprised they did it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. What was your reaction, Mike? Pretty much.
I mean, yeah. Well, so the reactions that I saw from people, kind of hit that line, and my own feelings sort of mirrored that, right? Which is, we were all shocked and surprised that Wizards of the Coast did absolutely the right thing, and that got me. But yeah, and I wasn't terribly surprised by the amount of people who thought it already was, and that of course must have played into their calculus of buying this, right? That the number of people who already thought that D&D Beyond was a Wizards of the Coast property, I think was a big deal.
Can I add a little context? Just for folks out there who may not know why we're saying the things we're saying, Wizards has had a track record of sort of pursuing digital possibilities and then having that not go very well. And sort of the entirety of 4th edition, but even before that with what they called Gleemax, there have been very large money spends for the time that resulted in almost nothing of measurable worth at the end of it. A lot of frustration by fans, a lot of frustration internally. And so the track record is just not there with anything working well. In fact, what D&D Beyond has managed to do is really maybe the only case of fans really going like, yes, that's what we wanted. It worked. And of course, It was an outside entity.
Yeah, and not even bashing like Wizards of the Coast, but any company, like many companies are like, well, never mind, we're gonna build it in house. And we know that especially companies that have had a lot of success, and Wizards of the Coast has certainly had a lot of success, can get filled with a bit of hubris and think like, we did this, therefore we can do all of this other stuff too. Mm-hmm. And that there were probably voices inside Wizards who said, why don't we just do this? Why would we do this other thing? But clearly, I think from the outside, the answer was they already have the market on this, right?
Right. And even the successes, well, at least on the D&D side, because we can say that like for Magic the Gathering, they have it together pretty well. I mean, I'm not a huge user of any of the Magic stuff, but it seems like it's pretty reasonable. But on the D&D side, even in the past where they have done things that the fans have liked, it hasn't been like monetarily valuable to Wizards. They would give you a character builder for free or for a very small subscription that you knew wasn't making them any money. It was just the tool that the players get to use as part of their experience of playing the game. Whereas with D&D Beyond, since it's an outside entity, for the first time, you could say, yes, they are definitely making money in this endeavor.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, I think that also created some discussion, right? Is that price tag of $146.3 million, is that too
that a
high?
lot?
Is
that
just
not
right?
enough?
Is it too low?
And the interesting thing there is it's kind of like, I have $146 million in this hand and a big revolver in this other hand, right? Like, I can buy you out and you can accept my offer, or I can pull my license and watch your company turn into a $10 company, right? So we know that there's got to be an interesting part there. And right, even, that like, who else are they possibly going to sell this thing to?
Yes,
right.
Yes, and Amazon owned them originally,
right,
and sold them off. And you have to wonder whether they wish they'd kept it or not. I
don't think Amazon thinks about this at all.
Yeah, probably not. Right, like
true.
it's too small a move at this point.
Right,
but maybe someday they might if the entertainment piece is big enough. But I think that it would be hard to find another buyer that would pay that amount. Certainly, nobody in the role playing game industry is doing it.
Yeah.
So it would have to be somebody from the outside, and to find a corporation that would want to do it is pretty hard. So it had to be interesting negotiation where Wizards sort of goes, who else is going to buy this?
Right.
A lot of your value is the IP, which by the way is ours.
Yeah. And like that's a limited license, right? Mm-hmm. Like we already knew, looking at it from the outside, that Wizards had a much more control over what D&D Beyond was doing than any of the other major platforms that is licensing D&D Beyond stuff, right? Like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds are both licensing D&D material, but they also have third-party material, and they also have this other stuff. And it's like D&D Beyond one time tried to add some third-party stuff to it, and they just got hit with a huge mallet, right? Yeah. And then took it down. I don't remember what it was. It was like I can't remember what it was. Video game based property that they tried to put up there, right? Yeah. And we know like they had invested they were trying to pick up another game. Adam Bradford, when he was back there, was investing in another RPG to try to like expand them, because you're like, if Wizards ever decided, we're going to go build this our own, and by the way, we're going to pull the license, like they're done, right? Like, I mean, it would be so bad. But what I love about this is like it's the right. And it's a great thing from like from three sides, right? It's a fantastic choice that Wizards made, because there's already 10 million users that already know the system, many of which thought it was already Wizards of the Coast, and it'll be no different to them. It's a fantastic thing for D&D Beyond, because now we don't have to worry, that now they don't have to worry about this licensing thing. Now it's theirs, right? There's no licensing issue anymore, and it's fantastic. More importantly, most importantly than everything is it's great for customers. Yeah. Because now we know that the material that we own on D&D Beyond is being given to us by Wizards of the Coast, not a third party who could lose the license, right? Yeah. And that was a huge risk for a long time, and now that risk is gone, and I think it's fantastic on all sides. I think I think this is like 95% fantastic news.
And I think we need to recognize that the reason any of this is even viable is because D&D is doing so well, right? Mm-hmm. That's why Wizards gave these licenses out to Roll20 and to D&D Beyond and to the DMs Guild in the first place, is because they did not think they would be able to make money on it, but maybe somebody else could. Yeah. And what these other companies,
it was something they didn't want to do, right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And they you talked about the hubris, right? They lost that hubris with fourth edition.
Yeah.
They lost that. They recognized, we are not experts in these fields, so let's give it to someone who could possibly be. So by doing that, they not only didn't earn all the money they could have if they had done it themselves and it succeeded, but they did earn some money, and they learned the lessons by watching these other companies, what these other companies did. And now they will be able to benefit if they can set aside the hubris, and if they can actually keep those lessons. I
mean, now it is in-house, right? Now the interesting thing is now the development team is in-house, and now the application is in-house.
And now it was built ahead of time, now Hasbro is paying attention, which could go either way, right? Yeah, now they have Hasbro resources behind them, not even monetarily, but just business related initiatives, which, as we have seen in the past, could go swimmingly well.
Yeah.
And if that hubris leaks in from Hasbro thinking, well, we are a large corporation and we can do anything. Right. Let's see what we can do. If they step in and try that, it could all go horribly wrong. So it's going to be interesting to see how it progresses now as it moves from from just straight D&D Beyond into Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to me, because it's something that I had paid a lot of attention to and talked a lot about, that like just how much risk I feel like the whole hobby was in based on this decision, right? That I really think like, I think Wizards probably felt like, oh, we could take those people, right? Like if we decided to build our own tool, I'm making this up. I don't know if anybody actually thought this, right? But it's possible that they thought, if we make our own tool, we're Wizards of the Coast, we own the properties, we'll be able to do this thing and it'll be lovely and everybody will want it. And we'll just bring all those people over here. But what they'd end up doing, and by the way, we might pull our license and that all those angry people over there, they'll just come here and buy it again. And like they might think that that could happen, but they're just going to shatter they're going to shatter the customer base, right? They're going to lose
really
somebody.
Painful for that to happen.
It would have been really painful. And
at the same time, you've got that, if I can jump in, that you've got that survey that came out, the You Will Not Talk About survey, which then other people talked about, which made it fairly public.
Right.
There was the survey that some people got, it cut off for some people. At some point, the survey just disappeared or didn't have the options. But some people who went through it apparently, had a bunch of things that were along these types of tools that we would say their partners handle for them. Mm-hmm. And so it showed that inclination that they had where they really were perhaps on the edge of the cliff, the precipice, thinking, should we just do this? And they have hired 45 to 90 people in this digital group. And while that's supposed to be largely video games, looking at those jobs, some of those jobs look like they are in this area of virtual tabletops, of entertainment provision. They're not just code video games. There were some that were directly in these kinds of areas.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, I mean, to me, it's like, I feel like we came off the cliff edge. And not only did we not have a situation where, the core kind of D&D fan base, because, again, my absolutely pure statistical polls that I do with no errors and no sample problems and everything like that I've done, say about half of people use D&D Beyond, right? About half of D&D players. So I can say this actually accurately. Half of those I polled said that they use D&D Beyond, right? And, grant sample size and everything. It's probably, I don't know. I actually don't know if it'd be larger or greater than that. But I bet you it's not too far off, right? And that's a lot of people to have potentially lose their products or lose access to products or potentially lose access to future products, right? Sure. There was this weird time. Do you remember when Tasha's was announced and D&D Beyond didn't say anything for 3 months? Yeah. Right. And we're like, what's going on? And it was only a few weeks before it came out that they're like, hey, we're doing it. Right. And you're like, normally every other book they announced at the same time, but you can pre-order right now on D&D Beyond. And that one they didn't. And I kept thinking is there something going on? Is there we're toying with the idea of not putting it on and Beyond, right?
I mean, I work in the IT field, and there have been a number of cases where other people who work in the IT field and I have kind of gone, what's happening there? Because, they used to say do all the unearthed arcanas and they would do a whole bunch of different things. And there's some things that have been on their back burner for a long time development wise that they haven't done. There are some all of it indications that they're struggling. And it says in the press release, a team of 80 that's coming over. That's a lot of people.
A lot of experienced people who've been building this in real life, hardened environments, right? With actual 10 million users using it. Well, so much better than building a team that hasn't done it all. Yeah.
You've got to incorporate those 80 people into you somehow, right? And one presumes that they'll be somewhat under this digital group that's being formed, but maybe not. It'll be very interesting. And one of the first questions was, well, who's going to head the group? And we got the answer via Twitter, as we get all employment news these days. Did we add this to the
press
show
releases?
Notes?
I hadn't heard this.
Okay, yeah. So I now forget. Maybe someone in chat remembers the name of the person, but it's a Joe who works on the. Now I'm forgetting all this.
Is it a Wizards of the Coast employee or was it a former?
They are now. They are now.
Okay, but they were. Was this somebody that came along with the D&D Beyond team, or is this a Wizards of the Coast person who's taking over?
No, so it is a person who's closer to D&D Beyond. They were working on
Joe Starr?
They worked on that video for Critical Role.
Oh, okay.
Producing that. So it seems like what they've been doing. They're a known entity. I'll have to find it.
Is it Joe Starr?
Yes.
Yeah, that came across in Twitch chat.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So here it is. Joe Starr saying...
Jay Hazor had that.
I'm pretty dang excited, and he's now named Head of Content for D&D Beyond at Wizards of the Coast.
Cool.
And Joe has done work with Screen Junkies, and that's who did the trailer for Critical Role, is my understanding.
Neat.
And he's been involved on sort of D&D Beyond type things, I believe, in the past. So that is So it's interesting that they didn't go with like, this person at D&D or this person at Hasbro. They brought someone who can be a bit of a middle. That's a good sign, right? That someone who can help translate. That's good. But who Joe reports to, we don't know, right? So that always matters. And I care about this because I work with very large corporations, and when they do these kinds of acquisitions, everything can go really well or really sideways depending on how you organize this and what freedom you do. You've got these 80 people coming in, you've got your 40 to 90, whatever on the digital side. How are they interacting? Who sets the agenda right now? Things like content, like, one of the things I would look at if I were Wizards is, what do I do with Dragon Plus when I have this D&D Beyond team cranking out content?
I had to
do
fix
I really
your
need Dragon Plus? Do I make, what do I do there, right?
Yeah, I mean, something is like when things, I mean, I don't know how it will work here, but sometimes there's like reorganizations that happen a couple of times before everything gets sort of nailed away. And when you have an acquisition like this, they can certainly change your mind in a year. Right. And I'm kind of like, well, I don't care. Right. Like whatever happens in the inside, I don't care. And my question is like, how does it work for us? Right. Are we good with it? And I just
care. I mean, not that I could control it, right? Which I think maybe is the lens you see it through, but I do care because when we had like the 4th edition efforts,
right,
you could feel, even if you weren't like having some of the conversations I had with people who worked there, you could just feel things not working, teams not aligning, goals shifting. And all you had to do was look at the picture of, if you opened up the monster builder, it had like, an icon, then the space for all these other icons.
Right, I remember.
Right, that were so obviously meant to be built and never showing up, right?
Yeah. It's hard to know, how the health of the thing is going to go by looking too much at the org chart, right? Like, they can change. People come and go all the time. I mean, one thing is probably pretty certain, which is D&D Beyond has now been bought out twice. I think at least twice. Was it not bought out a third time? I can't remember.
I think just
at least twice.
Yeah.
I think their parent company got bought out, right? Like they originally belonged to a company that got bought by Amazon.
Yeah.
Curse, right? Curse got bought out by Amazon.
Curse to Amazon, and then D&D Beyond to Fandom.
And then Fandom, right. Yeah. We're pretty sure it's not going to be sold again, right? Like, unless they decided to break it away and like, you know what? It's better if this runs as an independent company. It's probably staying there. And, so that's fine. But I look at it and not, again, predictions, we all know how accurate predictions can be. But it certainly feels like this is much stronger for the hobby. Like the growth, if we're going to watch 5e continue to grow, this is certainly the path that we could look at to say it will probably grow stronger here. And this does bring up like my
transition to 5.5, right? Because how was that going to be handled? Now it's
and now you can just fine, right? The one, like I say, like it's 95% fantastic news, right? And I really weight it that way. I'm not being coy about like the 5%. The one thing though is it really does, it further locks out third-party content, right? That like we knew, I was pretty confident you weren't gonna see third-party content showing up in D&D Beyond. Anyway,
well, that
right?
Was a question Jeff Stevens asked on his recent newsletter, and thank you, Jeff, for the mention of the show. He kind of asked a question which I've heard online a fair bit. Would the DMs Guild be integrated into D&D Beyond's database, right? Would it be that like, maybe the bigger projects or all projects, or there would be a venue by which you could publish to the DMs Guild, and then you see your creation turned into database form? Because and this is a valid, not just because people want more money and more reach, but because when you say, hey, let's go build a character, and so many people are using D&D Beyond, and then you say, hey, I want to use that thing that's over on the guild, but it doesn't exist in D&D Beyond, that's a problem for the customer, right?
Yeah, and now we have kind of two different kinds of third-party content too, right? We have things that are on the DMs Guild and things that aren't on the DMs Guild. And, I'm pretty sure, I think I would say with pretty high confidence, we are not going to see third-party material that's not on the DMs Guild there because we haven't, right? I doubt they're going to open it up and now suddenly all of Kobold Press's, character subclasses are going to make their way over. Maybe, it's possible, but like, I don't think we're going to see anything like that in a year. And, I don't know. It'd be very interesting to see.
I think that as soon as you get, let me back this up by saying I looked at the press release and I was both horrified and heartened at the same time by all the corporate speak that was in the press release. As soon as I see like best in class. We're getting it. But I'm like, boy, I heard that term so many times working in PR, in sales. And I'm like, that's terrible, but it's also good because you can tell that people are paying attention. And when people start paying attention at the highest levels of your corporation, they want every bit of money they can get. And if people are making money on the DMs Guild other than the Wizards of the Coast, Wizards of the Coast is looking at that and saying, how can we get some of that money? Now, that may be we get that money by putting it on the DMs Guild or putting it on our new D&D Beyond platform in its own section. And instead of the 30% that OBS gets, we are getting that 30% now. Or we get 20% and they get 30%.
They realize you're happy. They realize you're happy with 50, so they'll just take the 50.
Or we'll take the full 50, or hey, we'll give you 40%, 10 more percent than you were getting over there, and this and that. Now, going through the process of taking every subclass that we make as homebrew and putting it into D&D Beyond, that the programming of that, I think, would be beyond what they want to do at this point.
Yeah.
If you make an easy way to do it.
I think you're right on it with that. That's one of the core issues, is that the level of work, people underestimate how much work it takes to code things, and especially code things from a particular input, right? And so whatever the input is, the way that Wizards gives D&D Beyond the data of here's our next book, they've got a process for that at D&D Beyond to pull that in. Whatever your PDF looks like is not their process, and would be wildly challenging to handle just even a few books. And I think D&D Beyond already feels like they're kind of at capacity. So doing that much is rough. In fact, one of the Monsters of the Multiverse reasonings of why it's kind of being staged the way it is may be because of D&D Beyond's ability to integrate it, right? That whole, we're going to stay to the old one until the book releases alone, maybe because that's a lot of stuff to edit and change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And well, there's something about how clean the guild, or not so, how clean D&D Beyond is, right? That you do kind of know that everything was there is something that came from a Wizards of the Coast published material. And I mean, there are probably good ways to segment things off, because even that's getting kind of crazy and out of hand, right? It's like, do you want to include the Magic the Gathering settings and stuff from those books or not? Do you want to include
the Critical Role setting,
the Critical Role stuff that's there or not? Right now, things are already getting, there are all the switches, and they kind of work and they kind of don't. I have this problem in D&D Beyond right now where I'm like, no, I don't want any of these sources available to any of my players because we're not running with those in our game. And they're like, I still have access to all that stuff, right? And it's like, why do they have access to the spells? From Strixhaven, but they don't have the other thing. Well, because they bought Strixhaven, right? So they have their access to it. It's just
it's true. Yeah,
there is one question. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No.
There's breaking away from the DMs Guild and kind of third-party content support, which is one question. But I think a bigger question that I've seen is, what about a VTT? And then there's lots of speculation. Oh, won't they buy Roll20 next? And I'm like, I don't think so, right? For probably a few reasons. But then, what would they?
I think going over those reasons is probably helpful.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give my reasons, but I'm sure other people have other reasons. Roll20 has, I think, a far deeper spaghetti code base than likely D&D Beyond does. Roll20 also supports a tremendous amount of third-party material and other RPGs, and I don't think Wizards wants to buy that, right? They don't want to suddenly be supporting, Cortex. So there's a whole slew there. And there's something to be said for.
It's funny that you said Cortex, because
I know, but that's what D&D Beyond.
That's not D&D Beyond,
right?
Right. Does fandom own the Cortex, or does D&D Beyond own it? Because did Wizards just buy Cortex? Is my question.
That's a really interesting question.
That was a question that I saw Dave Chalker ask, who worked on Cortex.
Yeah, that's a fascinating.
It's a great question. Where is Cortex, and will that see?
It's a fascinating question for the six of us that know what we're talking about. Right?
Yeah,
and then. But I'm like, there's 10 million people that are playing it that have no idea what Cortex is.
All right, so on Roll20, I think you're right. There's such an enormity of third-party stuff that what to do with it is a hindrance to thinking about acquiring it. The other thing is Roll20's been growing really quickly, so their price tag has to be escalating.
Yeah, it's really high.
They have to be able to negotiate a lot better on what they're doing and seeing. But Roll20 is in that tough position where if Wizards were to say, you don't get the license for 5.5,
Yeah.
Right? Or you get no more 5th edition material or whatever, depending on, who knows what
but
the
even
wording
for
is.
them,
My guess is the deal goes for some time and probably covers all of 5th edition, but some 5.5 probably isn't covered. And that's where that could be
right, but think about, so imagine like Roll20 on one side and D&D Beyond on the other side, right? And let's say that Wizards decided we're going to pull our license from both, right? Roll20 will lose half of its users, which is not small, but it's half. D&D Beyond loses all of them, right? So you can survive as a company, right? Roll20 could survive as a company without, because they could support third-party material and they could support the SRD, all the material in the OGL, and still be running D&D stuff. They just can't use all the official stuff or all the Wizards of the Coast stuff. But like D&D Beyond couldn't have, they didn't, that's all they had, right? So the other one is like, can you imagine trying to integrate those two tools together? Like, which one of the compendiums would you choose, right? Like, Roll20 is so wired around the compendium data that it's got that you already have in this other thing. So it doesn't make any sense. But then the question is, well, what are, I think, I'm pretty confident that they are going to go for a VTT. Now, that might be something that they could build in-house, right? And sort of integrate with, or have the D&D Beyond team that they just acquired, the 80 people there, working on a VTT that's integrated with their existing D&D Beyond data feels far more likely than them acquiring a third-party one.
Yeah. When you acquire someone, though, you also acquire their users.
Yeah,
and that's true. That's the big question: is it worth it? Even though the technology may not be what you want, all these other things might not be what you want. Just the user base it's
a lot of accounts.
Can Wizards of the Coast, starting from scratch or starting from whatever point that they're at, have a VTT ready by 2024 when they release this new edition? I think
so. We saw 2 people in Australia build the best VTT I've ever used in like 3 months. I love it to death.
But that doesn't have the integration.
It can, though. I don't think it, I think if you've already got the whole, I mean, what do I know, right?
Are you talking about Owlbear
I'm a software
Rodeo,
engineer. Yeah, Owlbear Rodeo, right? I'm a software engineer, so like little bits, right? Little bit of probably on the Dunning-Kruger. I'm right at the top of the peak of the Dunning-Kruger, right before the fall off. But I'm going to stay right in that peak. And why should I be different than everyone else? So I think that if you had something like the compendium, even if you just ran a side window that had the log of dice rolling, right, sitting with the VTT window of Owlbear Rodeo doing, like, you don't need the actual connections to the tokens and stuff like that, right? I think there's a lot, and I don't think that would be monstrously hard, and they did it really quickly. I'm not saying that Wizards is going to have one up and running in 2 months, but I don't think it'll take 2 years for them to add a VTT if they really wanted to have one.
It was always funny to me to see the 4th edition VTT that was nothing for so long, and when it came out was actually quite reasonable.
I never even used it. I don't even know what we're talking about.
It was quite good. It wasn't fast. It needed some tweaks and things, but it was actually pretty neat. But I think it had so lost its steam.
When did that come out? I don't even remember using one.
Yeah, I played a few games.
Was it Essential? Was it when Essentials was out? Was it late in the cycle?
Yeah, it had to be during that period.
Huh.
Yeah, I just remember being at Winter Fantasy with the launch of 4th edition, or the play testing of 4th edition, and seeing what they were planning, and you're like, wow, this is going to be the coolest thing ever.
It looked like EverQuest. It looked like an MMO. I mean, not to use the MMO thing.
Yeah, they had
but it looked like they
rotation.
Right, they had like 3D rendered characters. Yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't have any connection.
About another thing which has come up this week a lot, which is at that Winter Fantasy, they were saying, in every physical book, you will have a digital coupon to unlock the digital content. And a lot of fans have been saying, am I going to get that since now you don't have to charge me twice?
So that was the number one on all of the responses that I saw. That I don't know why I started with VTTs, D&D Beyond or DM's Guild, but number one was, does that mean I don't have to buy? Does that mean I don't have to buy a book twice anymore? Right? Are they going to give me a free coupon for it?
What's the answer to that?
I'm not going to predict.
I'm sure you're not getting a free digital book. I would be.
Well, no, but I mean. Right. There is that very good question. We had a friend that brought this up, right? That even let's pretend for a minute that they said, sure, we're going to give you a discount, right? Like you get half off, because there is precedent for this, right? Like the D&D Essentials kit has a half off coupon for the player's handbook and a free copy of the adventure that's in the Essentials kit that you can get on D&D Beyond. So they've done it, but it's in a box set with a coupon,
where you can close it off in that box set,
where you can't go into Walden Books. Is Walden Books is out of business like 20 years.
Yeah, they haven't been around for 2
Barnes and Noble. You go into Barnes and Nobles, open it up, look at the coupon, snap it with your phone, and now you got your free copy. So how do they do that with a book that they're not shrink wrapping? that physical problem is actually something that could be an issue, right? But I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how. Well, I know that there's a demand for it. I know that there's a demand for something, right? And can they address that, or will they address that? That'll be a question. I'm interested.
Well, I mean, I think it goes beyond that question. While it would be great if that could happen, in order to get a digital version, you are also, if I put on my Ferengi ears, as they say, mine's going to be, you bought the book. Oh, absolutely. When you get your subscription to the VTT and the character builder and all these other tools, yes, you will get access to these rules as part of your subscription.
Yes.
Which could also then include our TV shows and our movies and everything that Hasbro is going to bring to the table. The My Little Pony channel is also included in your subscription to Hasbro Plus, which also includes D&D. You're right. It's going to be not
Hasbro
just
Press
that.
Plus, why not call it D&D Direct?
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
good point.
Right.
Right.
Is that a segue?
One of the interesting things for folks who saw this other piece of news, which is there has been a trailer for something called D&D Direct, which it's hard to tell what that is the name of, but the trailer kind of has this camera pan through all these various things that are on a table, and some of it's, physical dice. There is a tablet that shows the stats for a red dragon as if it were maybe like a digital book. So there is that, build your character, run your things online kind of component to it. There's physical stuff being shown. There are plushies, one of which is a spelljammer hamster. In fact,
Space hamster.
The Twitter image is called something like normal hamster or something like that, sort of making a joke of not a miniature giant space hamster. And so, are they going to talk about spelljammer on this thing? And it shows, it's kind of quick, but you can see there the script for the Hasbro D&D movie.
Oh, really? Yeah, I saw that.
And it's in that, plain block type, the way you do the first page of a script. It reads
Untitled D&D project or something like that, right?
Untitled D&D movie directed by Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daly. So, that I think, Shawn, that's exactly what's happening, which is, or at least that's what they want to happen, right? That they would like to have Disney Plus, D&D Plus, D&D Direct, that is a much larger buy-in that we would all make. We would consume their TV, their movies, their live streams, their D&D Beyond videos, their news, their D&D Beyond content, all of that digitally in whatever platform, from our phone to our desktop to anything. And that would be worth a big amount of money that you pay monthly, and then you get unlock the keys to the kingdom, right?
Yeah.
Then your player's handbook is in fact free because
it's so this is something
on the business side that's what makes the most sense based on, we're all pretty old dudes who are used to, we never even have digital books growing up, right? It was the book. And so we lived in a different time. And a lot of the people that we talk to lived in a different time. Times have changed. Access to things has changed. And people are used to subscriptions. I rage against subscriptions. I don't want to subscribe to the Microsoft suite.
What is this old man? Is this the official old man yelling at clouds segment of the show?
No, it's an old man saying, I understand I'm an old man, and it's okay. It's
Black
okay,
socks
right?
with sandals is a perfectly acceptable way to live.
I want to buy Adobe products without having to subscribe to them for the rest of my life, but that's not the society that we live in anymore. It's based on these subscriptions, and we're just going to have to get used to it.
Yeah, that it's super fascinating. But when you look at kind of, like Shawn and I have been following on Mastering Dungeons, all of these quarterly earnings reports and the write-ups that come about them. Thank you, comicbook.com, for such great coverage of those. And when you look at sort of what they say time after time after time, it's pretty clear that this is what they're trying to do, right? They bought E1, this media arm that is now behind the TV shows and the movies and all of this. And very clearly, they want to stop saying, hey, we've licensed the name Dungeons and Dragons to Paramount. Paramount, just make your movie, give us a cut. They want to make it, as they are doing now more and more. They want to own the shows. They want to come up with all of the creativity behind them, and they want to launch them. They want to platform them. just like Disney does, right? There was a time when Disney, hey, there you go, Fox, have at it, right? But now we want to own all of this. We want to have it in-house. We want all the profit from it. And that revenue growth is a critical part of all of it. And that may sound sort of, it is very corporate, very capitalist, and that has plenty of downsides to it. But it's also the logic of trying to orchestrate all of your brand, the way Marvel does, right? To own not
they're
just
building
comic books, but everything associated.
Yeah, this is something that D&D has done tremendously well over the past 5, while they've been scaling up, right? Since the beginning of 5th edition all the way to now. One thing, like the marketing arm of Wizards of the Coast, who has been handling this, has done a tremendous job of building a lifestyle brand, right? Like I just had to end my D&D shirt of the month subscription because I have too many awesome D&D shirts and I'm not wearing them enough. So like, they're like Harley Davidson, right? They're a lifestyle brand. You now identify with this brand not as like a product, but as as a core identity. It's my core identity, right?
Yeah.
And so on the marketing side, they want to capitalize on that by saying like, look at all this stuff. And I'm sure this is what we're going to see, right? Here, all these different sort of areas that we can go. There's obviously the game stuff, which is sort of core, but then there's movie, and then there's these other shows that we're going to do. And then, here's new video game properties, and here's all this other stuff, and kind of as, since I tend to focus on the tabletop RPG side, I'm only interested in about 30 or 40% of what they're talking about, right? Because then the other part is like, oh, hey, check out that awesome Legend of Drizzt game, right? That's going to come out, and they hype that to death, and you're like, well, let's see, right? And I feel the same way about the movie, like, let's see, right? We'll find out how good that is, and then the other try to tie properties together, I think, to the detriment of other problems, right? Which was, the Descent into Avernus thing, right? Well, guess what else is coming out then? Baldur's Gate 3. Let's tie these together. And they actually affected the RPG, right? They changed the RPG about that. And then Baldur's Gate didn't come out. It's still not out yet, right? So, it's interesting as a fan, and maybe they don't care. Like, I'll just go in and I'll pick the pieces that I'm interested in, and I'll ignore the stuff that I'm not. And then I'll let my fine friends here on Mastering Dungeons cover all of it, right? So it's really, I don't know, it's very interesting to see.
So should we talk a little bit about D&D Direct?
Sure.
You want to
tell us all about it?
All right. Well, so April 21st, it was, I think, the day after the acquisition was announced. So Wednesday is the acquisition. Thursday, they give us this teaser trailer that we were talking about. And they say on April 21st, big announcements are coming. D&D Direct is coming. And I think every fan was thinking, oh, this is going to be like D&D Live or something like that. And then we heard it's a half hour.
I'm pretty sure it's longer than that.
Some comicbook.com said it would be 30 minutes long.
I think they're wrong.
Hosted by Anna Prosser and B. Dave Walters. Yeah, is it longer?
I don't think I can give up a source.
Okay.
But I think it's,
longer than that.
I think it's longer than that.
Is it longer? Well, without giving up your source, is it longer? It's 45 minutes, or is it longer?
No, I think it's an hour.
This is like a full week. Okay, so it's not the D&D Live full weekend
all
of streams and games.
Let me look at something here. I hear it is 8:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific time.
Okay.
All right.
The presentation. So there's you know what I think it is. So I think there's an official presentation that's 30 minutes, and then there's an hour of hoopla and celebration.
The website just says starts at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern.
Yeah, I think the event, the overall event, is intended to go for 90 minutes.
Okay,
but
so this is supposed to be, quote, get your first peek at the future of Dungeons and Dragons at D&D Direct, streaming April 21st, 9 a.m. Pacific. See exclusive reveals across the world's greatest role-playing game. Apparently they're not.
Thank you for the dramatic reading, by the way. This is helping.
See exclusive reveals across the world's greatest role-playing game. Books, video games, entertainment, and more. This is one jam-packed show.
Yes, it is. And
we're all going to watch it. So
yeah, the head of D&D at Wizards, Ray Winninger, said, this is where we will finally release details about some of the things that he's been hinting at. So video games, tabletop games, and entertainment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what are they announcing? What are they announcing?
I refuse to make a prediction.
What do you predict, Mike?
I will. We're going to be right about Spelljammer one day. So, I mean, and I go back to the fact that if we look at the data, like it's generally about 6 months from the time a playtest comes out till a thing comes out that uses that playtest, and there was a pretty clear Spelljammery playtest. So like I kind of mocked the people who lost their minds when Wizards did their non-April Fool's joke. I mock everybody, right? Because it's like, does Wizards think that you can actually have subtlety on Twitter and it'll work? The answer is no. And do they think that like your double fake, April Fool's thing is going to work? And all it did was, I don't know. I mean, there's probably some people who are kind of amused. I was amused, but there's a bunch of people who are like, "How dare you, sir or ma'am, wreck my," and you're like, "Oh man, can we all just relax a little bit, right?" Like I love, I live and breathe this game. We can all just take it easy.
Yeah, I was lucky. My childhood was ruined the first time, so it can't be ruined again.
I keep going with like, I can't tell who's trolling who, right? Because I'm convinced that all the people who have been screaming about Spelljammer, like, I was just kidding. I don't want Spelljammer. That's ridiculous. Space Dragons, right. I'm not going to play Space Dragons. So,
I've blogged about why I think Spelljammer is amazing and how I initially thought it was completely stupid. So it's a bit of both is the answer, right? It is the ridiculous, but it also can be incredible, and it can be Star Trek, and it can be a lot of things. And so I think there are people there who are old who have played it and who would like to see it return. There are people who are old who would not like to see it. The vast majority of today's D&D players don't know what it is.
Yeah,
so the reality is Wizards gets to decide what it will be.
The one
how
tweet
campy, silly, or how awesome it is. Like that's
The one tweet that I had to mock was a reply to them that said, "Most players want this. How dare you?" And I was like, first of all, as one who gets beat up about statistical relevance of surveys all the time, how did you get a hold of most DMs? Because I would love to know how to do it. And B, come on, most DMs haven't been playing. They've been playing for 2 years, right? More than half of Dungeon Masters have been playing, or half of D&D players have been playing roughly 2 years. I guarantee you, would 20% know what Spelljammer is? I'm not even sure it would be that. Right?
It would be less, much less.
Yeah,
and it's the same thing with anything classic, right? With Dragonlance, any of that. I mean, maybe you have a few more people who've read the novels, but even those are really old. And so a lot of these things are names that you can use to draw inspiration from, but you want to create a new experience out of it, probably anyway, and you should. So
I'll go with easy.
I would say more than half the players don't know what Tyranny of Dragons is.
Yeah, right.
Right.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, absolutely correct.
That's the kind of shift that we're talking about in the player base since 5th edition.
And I've shared this with Shawn and Mike in the past, but when I would travel a lot for work, and I would go to a different state, every 3 weeks or something, and I would find the local gaming store, and I would go in and I would play a game of D&D Encounters back then. And what I found was overwhelmingly the case is that out of a table of people, one of them would follow anything about D&D online. Yeah. The other 6 or 7 people at the table, 5 to 7 people at the table, were only seeing D&D through the lens of that gaming store. That was their world of Dungeons & Dragons, whatever was on the shelves. So if there was an Eberron playtest, I'd be like, "Do you guys see that?" And they'd be like, "What's Eberron? What playtest? What website? I don't know what you're talking about."
Why would you do that? Yeah. Right. What are you talking about? Yeah, I mean, now to answer the question of other predictions, I'll give 3, and I'm going with lowball, very easy things. I think I would not be surprised if they announce another starter set, because we already saw some hints about that. It got leaked a little bit, a little bit ago, and it wouldn't surprise me to see that. It would not surprise me I expect we probably will see. I would not be surprised if we see Spelljammer stuff. And I wouldn't bet against Dragonlance, some Dragonlance stuff getting announced. I think all 3 of those, I'm not guaranteeing any of them, but I would say a higher probability of those than than Hollow World. I don't think we're going to see any Hollow World stuff. Or guess what? We bought Pathfinder.
Birthright the video game.
Birthright the video game.
Birthright the video game. Yeah.
Shawn, any predictions?
Oh, well, I think it's safe to say that we're going to see something about entertainment. So we're going to hear something from the movies, whether it's just a 1-minute teaser, or if we get the trailer, the first trailer, maybe. Yeah, something like that would be cool. Hear more about any TV shows, Netflix, Amazon, however they put them out. We'll probably hear a little bit about those. I wouldn't be surprised if more than 50% of what was announced had nothing to do with actual gameplay.
Yeah. I bet.
Or at least tabletop gameplay. If you talk about video games.
Yeah, maybe even a third, right? Maybe a third of it is about tabletop, and a third is about entertainment stuff, and a third about video game stuff.
Yep.
That wouldn't
here are my
me.
predictions. I think, like Mike, something Spelljammer, but this might be a case where it's that unusual format that Winninger had last year sort of enigmatically said that one of the classic settings will be in an unusual format you haven't seen before.
It's going to be a great stone wheel. Right, you have to go to the store and put it on you're going to need a big truck to wheel this giant stone wheel to your house to place.
It's cuneiform tablets that are going to be used. So I think that something like that, and Spelljammer has some interesting things, like it has mass combat, and there are a lot of possibilities. There you could dream up some weird ways to unleash some Spelljammer. So maybe that. Yeah. I think that the movie, I think it would be really cool if they revealed the title of the movie. And maybe even like something about the setting. Like it's no secret there have been pictures that show like the flags of Neverwinter in some of the film sets that were captured. So if they were to tell us that it involves Neverwinter, or confirm that piece of text we saw somewhere that was talking about Icewind Dale, confirm those things and tell us the name of it, I think would be really sweet. That would get a lot of excitement going. Yeah. The new video game, there is a studio that Whitney Strix-Bertrand works at. And they said they were working on an open world third person project for D&D. Now they were still hiring, but I could see that they might announce that, and it wouldn't shock me if that kind of game was either Ravenloft or Planescape based. I could see that work.
That'd be interesting. A new Planescape.
And then I wonder if there couldn't be some hint at what D&D Direct is, like that this could be the name of something bigger that would include D&D Beyond and TV and stuff like that. I don't think they're going to talk about 5.5 at all.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that.
That would be at least nothing that would settle our nerves about open gaming license or how compatible it would be. Nothing along those lines.
That'd be great. But
that's why
I don't think they know. I think they're still figuring it out. I hope. I hope they haven't locked themselves into anything at this point.
Right.
The other thing that would be interesting is if they had some way of promising something that would come from D&D Beyond that would be new and exciting. And I think a lot of us would take like just something like improved search, right?
Yeah, source-based search would be great.
Yeah, I mean it's strangely like on mobile but not on desktop, right? And so like just a few things like that would make that purchase go a long way if they were to say like we're working on redoing that, or someone just mentioned an API, right? Like something like that could be really fascinating.
I'd love an API, obviously. I'd love to hack into that, but I wouldn't expect it.
No, I don't think
there's so few people are going to care, and it's a lot of work to get an API like that working. And unless there's some business reason to do it.
And they want everything on their place, not distributed, is my guess.
I mean, that would, it's just total out there, but wouldn't it be fascinating if they said, we are going to create an API, and instead of having a license where we give you content, the license is to access the API of D&D Beyond. And so Roll20 could switch over from having its own data to connecting over to D&D Beyond to pull it. That'd be fascinating. And there'd be a business reason to do that, but I wouldn't hold my breath.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just, and thinking back a little bit on the beginning part, that it really is, pinch me level of unbelievable that D&D is this big, right? That there used to be a time when just saying that D&D is 146 million would have been a big deal, let alone that it can just easily
buy
acquire
a third-party company.
Right.
That's true.
When you think of the value of what D&D is, right, you have to add 146 million to it for this tangential side, right? This adjunct thing.
Yeah. I mean, actually, you guys might know the numbers on this. Did Wizards of the Coast talk about how many people are playing D&D worldwide these days? And was that number roughly 20 million people? Because we know that D&D Beyond has 10 million. They did say that D&D Beyond has 10 million users. That's a lot of 10 million is huge. 10 million is...
Although all these user numbers are always super inflated, right? I mean, I've been in charge of coming up with these numbers. They're always so...
Yeah. But
how many users do we have? Well, if we add anyone who ever visited the website...
That's true.
Pretend that's a user.
Right.
Yeah.
Plus,
I mean,
plus
I think for this one is anyone that's ever signed up for an account.
For testing reasons. Yeah.
Everybody, have your parents log in now.
Yeah. Oh man, I've been there. Yeah. Set up a site that gives us web hits.
And same thing with the how many people have played over time. I mean, I don't know how they're coming up with that, and so they're just numbers. I mean, they are less about the accuracy of them and more how they grow over time, and that's the thing that's very clear is it's hugely growing.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's a lot of people. I mean, so pretending for a minute that that's the number of users, that's bigger than World of Warcraft was in its early days, like 7 million. You know, I remember like EverQuest was like 500,000 people, right? And then World of Warcraft came around and got like 7 to 12 million people. They're hitting those numbers that they were aiming for when they were doing 4th edition. Yeah, it took them 10 years.
The numbers that I would want to know if I were Wizards would be the contrast between how many people purchased this new book that I just launched versus how many people do I think are active players. You know, or even active with my brand, right? It doesn't even have to be a player, but that you are interacting with my brand in some way. I think we've all seen that when a new book comes out, 90% of the interaction that I see is from people who aren't even really giving it a big skim.
Yeah, sure. They're just grabbing it. Yeah.
Like, right. The number of people who say buy a Rime of the Frost Maiden versus play a Rime of the Frost Maiden is very different, right? And
it's
so
one of my it's one of my complaints about how D&D Beyond works overall, which is like how easily you can add new capabilities to your character and not read anything about the story that's behind it. And so there's a whole reason why you have a particular subclass, and it's so easy in Beyond to just be like, I like it because it has this power. And it's like, do you even know what a Rune Knight does? No. Why does it have giant things? I don't know. I don't care. Right? And it's like, it's because it's tied to giants. Like, you might want to go read it. So, you know, it's an unfortunate, it's an unfortunate side effect of making something really easy is sometimes there's a little bit of homework that people ought to do.
We could do a show on that topic, right? Like, because I think that's a really key topic when we look at a lot of how these new subclasses and stuff are made, but not today's topic.
No.
Yeah. But it's also interesting in the sense that Wizards of the Coast will not be making as much money off the people that are only going to look at the Rune Knight as opposed to the people who pay to go see the movie or pay for the streaming service, because most groups, I would guess, the DM buys the books, the players, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Wizards isn't making any money off of those players that don't need to buy the book, can go get the character builder free if their DM signs them up for a campaign on D&D Beyond. So monetizing those players that aren't buying the books is an important goal for Hasbro and for Wizards of the Coast. It's important to keep that in mind as well. As much as I don't love capitalism for all its flaws, we have to be real that this is the world that the game comes from, and keep those things in mind.
Right. I think a lot of us, this is that whole sort of looking at the potential licensing issues is, I think when we are all kind of into a lifestyle brand, we think of it as a community, and they absolutely want us to think about it as a community, right? We talk about the D&D community, and we talk about all this stuff, and you're like, there's a corporation behind this, right? And that corporation can do corporate stuff. And I don't think it was completely ever taken off the list of the idea of like, should we pull the licenses and do this ourselves, right? Regardless of the fact that 10 million, I'm going to make the number. No, I'm going to use the number because it's the only number we got, right? That 10 million people would be very upset about the fact they probably weren't paying customers, right? But some large number of paying customers are going to be like, wait a minute, I can't integrate this new stuff with the old stuff anymore, or I don't have access to the old stuff anymore, right? They're corporate decisions. They're not community decisions, right?
Well, and they don't have to.
Sometimes they align, sometimes they don't.
They don't have to all be like, this is not a company that's extracting oil from the earth, right? So it's not. It's a little different in terms of what's happening. Because at the end of it, what we're doing is thinking about how people interact with this game, and so some of that can be problematic, but only so far, right? And I think one of the things that's always tough is RPGs are a big, wide industry where such a huge number of people are just under one brand, and when news like this comes out, everybody who's working on those other areas just goes, "Are you kidding me? Like, how is their character builder 146 million, right? Like it's got to just seem so difficult.
Yeah.
But what can also happen, and is starting to happening sort of regardless, I'll say just regardless, but what's happening is this big reviewing of the type of entertainment that role-playing games are. It's not nerds in a basement, and it stopped being that for a long time, even though there might be those jokes still there plenty on TV shows and stuff like that. It is a really big, wide-reaching way that people can interact with these kinds of stories and group storytelling and board games and all kinds of things like that, video games, that will be transformative. And we're already seeing that there's like a Warhammer TV show inspiration that's in the works, and there's a Blades in the Dark TV show that's in the works. There's the Critical Role animated show. There are going to be a lot more of these types of expressions that really widen what our industry is. And it may be that a game like Blades in the Dark may make some X amount of money for its creator, where X is probably very small, but the TV show. And so a lot of these things may seem really daunting to people that don't work on D&D or who want to see D&D fail. But at the same time, I think that whole rising tide lifts all boats. I think we're going to see a lot of that as this entertainment thing widens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does bring up a question. I know we might be tight on time, but it brings up the question of what do third-party publishers think of this? And I think all three of us are in that boat, right? We've all published material and are publishing material that is not going to be included in this acquisition, right? And what does it mean for us? And I've asked a few others too about like what it means. And some are like, I don't know, it's not really any different, right? It's, and others are like, no, we're batting down the hatches. Like we're going to carve our own path and go our own way. And it's interesting to kind of see that. I actually try to aim to produce things that can be used with a recognition that a lot of people are using D&D Beyond. So I don't publish subclasses, right? It's not something I go for. I tend not to even publish monsters very often because I think like having a whole big pile of monsters that aren't available there changes what people can use. So I tend to aim for things that you could use, with all of these tools in place. But I know lots of people don't think that way. Like even everything from a small publisher who is still publishing subclass, like an individual subclass on the DMs Guild, all the way up to, huge behemoth companies that are, running $1 million Kickstarters for books of monsters. Yeah. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
It is. And I mean,
think
and
about
there's
what it
that
means
whole
for third party
thing of
publishers.
like when you do those polls of how many people are using 5th edition official adventures versus homebrew, right? Homebrew is enormous. Right. But the lens we see things through may make us think the opposite, and it's not.
Well, it's one of those like the interesting thing about so again, the last few polls, those polled responded that more than half of them are running their own adventures in their own campaign setting. But the interesting thing is like still the largest number one campaign setting is still the Forgotten Realms, right? Because all of those don't count as one, right? They all count as, 5 million small campaigns, right? Written by different people.
Plus, the Forgotten Realms will eat whatever setting you create and make it its own.
Kinda, yeah. So
just because people are running their own adventures in their own campaigns doesn't mean they're not buying other adventures.
Buying and running are two different things.
Stripping them for parts,
yeah. Buying and using. Or that's a guy who buys lots of stuff, and I go, that's cool, and then I archive it. Right? There, a lot of people are buying stuff that isn't getting used. So from a business perspective, that's one thing. But I think all of us as creators want it to be used.
That can be fine and not fine at the same time, right? So I think that this accelerated book schedule, where a few years back it would have been Rime of the Frost Maiden would have been the theme for almost a year.
Yeah.
Rime of the Frost Maiden got very little spotlight, and Witchlight got really, really little spotlight.
Shocking.
I mean, it got that sort of D&D live event, and then it kind of is just out there. But it is one of the, if not the best, one of the best.
Yeah.
Most people would agree one of the best 5th edition official adventures ever written. Deserves a whole lot of spotlight, and it's hard to tell how much more attention it got than, say, Strixhaven, right? Or Fizzbands or any. There's so many releases, and I think that it was easier to say that, like, Tomb of Annihilation is a great example. You might not have run Tomb, you might not have read it, you may or may not have purchased it, but you felt that theme because it was such a theme that was out there. And now that's more confusing, and so I'll be curious to see whether any of these efforts that they are doing will help solidify that a bit more, because I think it is important for all of the fandom to be a little bit aligned, to have that theme, feel that theme. And with all those releases, maybe it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and interesting. So one just, again, totally flawed statistic, but it gives some semblance of numbers. I like to look at how many reviews something has gotten on Amazon as a very rough gauge of general popularity. And the interesting thing is Witchlight has half of the number of reviews that Descent into Avernus has. Right now, Witchlight hasn't been out as long, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't know if it'll reach that same number. And like, you guys have looked at both, right? One of you wrote on one of them. Which ones do we think is the stronger of the two, right?
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff, yeah.
It's super fascinating. And all of these changes are going to factor into that expression of the game, how the game is expressed for us. Fans are all very different, but it's colored by how D&D is projected at its audience, right? There's a relationship back and forth there.
I mean, just my thought is like, I'm happy that this happened. That when I heard that happen, I immediately felt relief, and I immediately, talked to a bunch of people. It was, a bunch of people I talked to every day about D&D stuff. We all were like on board with it. I told my wife and she's like, wow, that's awesome. I talked to my players at my game who are very much of the not paying attention to the D&D news. And they're like, holy cow, that's fantastic to hear. Like everybody felt this sense of like, there was a guillotine hanging over this head that could be dropped, and it's not now. It was taken away, right? And it's just
that's true.
It's
that
fantastic.
is a big bullet that we dodged. I mean, if somehow all of those, as you said this before, if all those purchases had been kind of invalidated or because it'd be really confusing if somehow it was like, hey, the next book, it's going to be not on D&D Beyond, but will be on whatever our new thing is, right? And you wait, do I make a character half on one platform, half on what?
Yeah,
that would have been.
And we've all worked with executives. Sometimes they're smart and do the right things, and sometimes they just go with their gut, and it's the wrong answer. And this is a decision made by probably a very small number of people, right? Maybe one.
Yeah.
And they made the right one, and it's great when that works out.
For sure. Well, we are at our limit here for Mastering Dungeons. So first of all, thank you to our live viewers here. We appreciate you coming to share a Saturday morning with us. Thank you to our listeners out there in listener land. Mike, thank you for being a guest this week.
Always my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Where can people find you who may, for some reason, not know about the Sly Flourish empire?
Slyflourish.com. My website, slyflourish.com. Best way to get access to all the other things that I do is right off of that page.
I didn't know you had a blog.
Yeah, I have a blog. I don't have comments. That's why you don't know about it.
You should get on YouTube.
Yeah, I should start up a YouTube channel. That'd be a good thing to do. Yeah.
You can find Mike's YouTube channel if you go to slyflourish.com.
There's a link right at the top. Exactly. A link to all the things. Yeah.
And Teos, thank you again as always. Where can people find you?
Alphastream.org will lead you to all of the places where I interact with Mike and
where we argue about.
How about you, Shawn?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin. You can follow the podcasts at Mastering D&D on Twitter, and Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production. So, Teos and Mike, we have been saved by the mighty hand of Wizards of the Coast purchasing D&D Beyond. And what are we going to do now?
Hug a monster.
Ooh, yeah. I'm going to write a spelljammer straight into Crin Space.
Ooh.
Sounds good. I am going to avoid that like anything.